build. I'm joined in the studio now by Kwasi Kwarteng, former Chancellor of the Exchequer under Liz Truss. Let's put that to you now, because Jonathan Powell is talking about Conservatives having trashed the economy. I'm going to go for your juggler, but I'm going to say, because the viewers and the listeners might be thinking this, is everything that's going on with inflation and interest rates your fault and Liz Truss's fault?
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, if you look back, and you mentioned this yourself, at the end of November 2021, which wasn't a million years ago, it was only 18 months ago, the interest of the bank rate was at 0.1%. And what happened was that we had huge public spending because of COVID. As Rishi Sunak observed, I remember talking to him when he was Chancellor, inflation was a problem.
Yes.
And I'm afraid I'm one of those who thinks the bank was a bit slow in reacting to it. And in fact, Andrew Bailey himself acknowledged that he and his colleagues had made a mistake in terms of their forecasts.
Let's talk about Andrew Bailey, because George Osborne has claimed that she, Truss, dismissed the economic establishment. She fired the permanent secretary at the Treasury. She went around telling everyone, as did her Chancellor, that's you, I believe, Kwasi, that the Bank of England governor was, quote, useless.
No, I never said anything about it.
Do you think he's useless?
No, I don't.
Do you think he's a Treasury stooge?
I think he essentially represents the orthodoxy that Liz Truss was against.
Yeah.
And I think there's still an issue with the problems we were trying to solve. I mean, I'm very struck by the fact that nobody's talking about growth. We're always firefighting. We're always talking about, obviously, having to deal with inflation. We've got to put up interest rates to do that. The whole growth agenda has been sidelined.
Do you think Treasury officials are pushing for recession?
No, I don't think they are as such. I think there'll be one or two people who probably think, actually, a recession would be quite a good idea because then we would deal with inflation.
I mean, I'm not an economist. I'm a journalist, and therefore my mathematics is poor, as you can imagine, Kwasi. But at the same time, the idea of a recession being preferable strikes me as economic lunacy. What do you think?
It's mad, but let me be very clear. I don't think that's the corporate view. I just think there are one or two, you hear it whisperings.
But Jeremy Hunt seems to be slightly hinting at it.
I don't know what Jeremy meant by his remarks, but I think, openly to will a recession when you're responsible for an economy is not responsible.
Can you give us a greater impression of what it was like when you were trying to push some of these more radical policies?
Sure.
We've heard Jake Berry earlier talking about blobonomics.
Blobonomics, yes.
So you're Chancellor, you're saying we want to do something really radical, we want to go against the grain, we want to return to a period of Thatcherite economics.
Well, that sort of thing, yeah.
Just please explain what the pushback is like.
I think that you're dealing with institutions where there are thousands of people, they've been set in their ways. Many of them were appointed in the New Labour time, so they're sort of continuity New Labour, if you like.
OK, so what are you saying? There are lefties in the Treasury?
Well, they're not lefties. They're people who believe that, they're not as averse to high taxes as I and Liz Truss were. And you're dealing with these institutions, and you've got to work. Ultimately, we learned the hard way that you've got to work with them. And I think that the actual goal that we set out, a low-tax, dynamic economy, is something that we should still be working for.
But were you withholding information from them, or were they withholding information from you? Because obviously you were criticised for not including the OBR and for sacking Tom Scholar and for maybe keeping some of your policies under wraps, because I guess you didn't want them to be immediately turned upon. But at the same time, I've kind of got the impression over the course of recent months that Liz Truss thinks that stuff wasn't explained to her, for instance, about LDIs.
The LDI thing was not known about. And that only became a problem when it was a problem. So it was not something that was identified. My own view about the mini-budget, looking back, was that things were at a blistering pace. I mean, Liz Truss was only appointed on the 6th of September, and I delivered the mini-budget on the 23rd of September. And in the meantime, we had, the tragic event of the passing of Her late Majesty and the funeral and all the rest of it. So 2.5 weeks where things were going very, very fast indeed. And actually, my own view has always been that you've got to try and slow things down to make sure that you prepare the pitch. That was the David Cameron.
Although you did the doubling down, didn't you, on the Sunday?
I did.
Do you regret that now?
No, I think my words were slightly misinterpreted.
And when I say that, just to explain to viewers and listeners, you were sort of told, would you go further with tax cuts? And you said, yeah, maybe.
Yeah,
and the markets are spooked.
Yeah, but the issue before that was that we'd said that we would have we'd have statement on spending. I'd said in the statement on the Friday that there was going to be a further statement looking at the spending side and trying to show spending restraint. Now, my own view is that, in retrospect, we should have done them together in a normal a classic budget. We should have had the spending restraint, as Jeremy Hunt announced at the end of last year, as well as the tax cuts together to show that the tax cuts weren't entirely unfunded. That was my view.
OK.
That is my view now. I mean,
what do you think of things like furlough and the energy bailout? I ask because whenever the Conservatives give people money, they never get thanked for it.
No.
You've still got the left going on about cuts and austerity when you've actually spent too much money. That's why you're in this mess. Were some of these policies a mistake in retrospect? Spending too much on furlough. There's now talk of mortgage bailouts. I mean, that would be having renters bailing out the haves, the people who actually own property.
That's right.
Why at every turn are people talking about bailouts? I
think COVID, and we've got to remember what happened with COVID, completely changed people's perception of what the government could do. And I think going into COVID, we were spending a lot less money. We were a much more nimble economy, I would say. And then as a consequence of COVID, we spent hundreds of billions. I think it was something like £400 billion.
In retrospect, it was too much.
Well, it's easy to say with hindsight.
I know.
But actually at the time, we were being criticised again for not doing enough. And I think the Treasury, the Chancellor at the time, Rishi, now the Prime Minister, actually did respond very quickly. I think, and I have to say this, Rishi was very right about the inflation. I remember him talking to that about me when I was business secretary. Yeah. And he said, look, inflation is a big problem. The bank, I think, has been slightly less alive to that problem.
Are we now a poor country masquerading as a rich one? I mean, it feels like we are kind of like the inflation beast of the West. Our inflation rate is high. The Americans got a handle on it much earlier. We're sort of heavily indebted. We've got a kind of population thinking that they deserve pay rises for working at home more and that they need to be bailed out of their mortgage bills. We can't afford to do any of this stuff.
No, it's not sustainable, I think. And I think we're going to have to talk about growth. We're going to have to talk about growing the economy. And I hate to sort of bang on about this, but the only way we're going to actually have good public services is if we can afford to pay for them. And the only way we can afford to pay for those is by growing the economy so that we get more tax receipts from a buoyant economy.
Has Jeremy Hunt got a point, and indeed Rishi Sunak in the week, in saying the best tax cut we can give the public is a fall in inflation?
I think they're right to focus on inflation because you've got to remember that the inflation target is 2%. That's 2%. So, and now, as Jake said, it's 8.7%.
He's not going to deliver on this deliverable by the end of the year.
Well, let's see.
Get it down to 5%, do you think he will?
It's challenging. It's challenging. I think he can. I think we've got...
Really?
I think he can. I think in America, inflation fell very quickly.
What's your prediction as to what will happen with interest rates? I mean, they're now at 5%. There's talk of 6%. How long for?
Well, the market is expecting 6%. I mean, that's well known. That's out there. But as I say, it's all to do with the inflation rate. If the inflation rate falls more quickly than people expect, I don't think you're going to see massively increased interest rates.
But is there this sense that they were ultra low for far too long, and actually the status quo should be to have an interest rate around 3 to 4%? We're all lulled into this false sense of security that debt is cheap and therefore it lasts forever.
Yeah, there's no doubt that we had a period where we had exceptionally low rates. I mean, I remember at the end of 2021, I was business secretary, the interest rate was 0.1%, and it was only moved in November. 0.1, so it's 50 times higher, the interest rate, than it was in October 2021, and that's not very long ago. So they were very, very low rates. And just to recap on the history, obviously we had the 2008 crash, the financial crisis. They went very low then. And then, of course, after COVID, the economy was essentially in lockdown. And we needed to have a period of essentially cheap money to get things going again.
But the Bank of England printed too much money. Quantitative easing was too high.
That's clearly what is very likely to have happened. The fact that we were printing money and spending it as well led to this increased inflation. And as a consequence of the increased inflation, we're essentially playing catch up with the interest rates.
What was your reaction to Mark Carney blaming Brexit?
I thought that was slightly bizarre. I mean, it's well known that Mark has always been against Brexit. But to blame Brexit for everything that's gone wrong, I think, is completely unrealistic. In fact, as someone who supported Brexit, I look at the vaccine rollout. I look at a lot of the stuff we're doing in foreign affairs. And that the fact that we're out has already shown that we have an independence.
I know, but you, like me, shared this sort of dream of a low corporation tax rate to be more competitive with the likes of France or Germany.
Sure.
I mean, I don't know if you advocated Singapore on sea from a deregulation standpoint, but this was meant to make us much more dynamic and forward-facing and a world leader in global trade. None of that's materialised. It's a failure of Tory government, isn't it?
Well, we tried. And actually, I'm one of those people, I've been to Singapore. It's always being traduced as some evil place where there's sweatshops. Singapore is a really prosperous place. And if you look at 60 years ago, it was nothing. It was literally just a kind of malarial swamp, as it was described.
Yes.
And what they've achieved is amazing. So when I hear people, the left particularly, saying how bad Singapore is, I'm just thinking that's one of the great human success stories of the 20th century.
So and we should be trying to
Well, I would have liked to have seen a more dynamic, I would still like to see a more dynamic economy, an economy where people are incentivised, an economy where people feel happy to invest in the UK. And not to say that, there is still investment in the UK, but I think we could be doing even better.
Final question, because I can feel a government U-turn in my bones. This £170 green levy, you had suggested that it shouldn't be put on taxpayers' energy bills because they're already suffering. We've now got the government saying that they want people to pay this £170 in green levies. What do you think they should do?
So the view, certainly last autumn when I was still in government, was that it should be absorbed in the general tax. It shouldn't be put specifically on bill payers because the bills already were very high.
So should they U-turn on this? It's a wrong.
Well, I don't know what that.
I mean, they're saying put it on bills, and people are saying, well, my bills are already sky high, and now I can't pay my mortgage.
There's been a bit of mixed messaging, but I mean, I understand where it's coming from because as Energy Minister, I was very focused on trying to get new technologies, green technologies, up and running. So I understand the need to subsidise new technologies, but at the same time, at this moment, particularly last autumn when energy bills were very high, I think it was a bit too much to expect people to pay an extra £170.
Do you reckon if Liz Truss had stayed the course, we'd be in a better situation economically now?
Look, I think, there are challenges. There are always challenges in government. And, I was very disappointed, obviously, to be dismissed. I thought, when I was dismissed, I thought that was the end. I thought, I didn't see the point of it. But I think we'd still be facing difficult challenges. But she had a lot of drive and purpose. And I think this growth question isn't going to go away. We're going to look back in 3 or 4 years' time and say, how are we going to grow this economy? And I think that's a really important debate to be had. And I don't hear any of it now. I just hear a lot of firefighting, a lot of, dealing with current problems, which is understandable.
Kwasi, thank you very, very much for joining me this morning.
Thank you.
Really lovely to speak to you.